What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review the season 1 finale for Night of the Seven Kingdoms, an episode called The Morrow. Unlike with a lot of seasons of Game of Thrones, as well as with House of the Dragon, it was kind of a calm, subdued final episode. However, that final scene, and there will be spoilers in this video, but that final scene between Dunk and Egg, goosebumps the size of grapefruits up and down my forearms, up and down my neck, where they started to echo some of their dialogue from when Egg first became a squire at the beginning of the season. And good God, as they started riding off and you saw like the ghost of Sir Arlen riding away, I mean, it was just incredible, like an emotional high point. So in that show's, or in that scene's honor, I'm going to pour myself a cold beer. Whoa. And my dad gave me this fancy schmancy pewter mug many years ago, which if you put ice in it ahead of time, it makes it really, really cold, so it stays cold, keeps your beer cold. But we're going to have a celebratory beer and talk about this episode. Not that there's a ton to discuss, but cheers to your health. That's good. I feel like it should be a tradition on this channel from now on. Anytime there's a season finale or a series finale on HBO of a great show, something like Succession, then we should have a celebratory cocktail like I did during the season 4 finale of Succession. In any case, I'm always happy to have a good excuse to discuss the fantasy genre on this channel. However, it's a hell of a lot more fun when we have a show that deserves our attention. And I read a few days ago that this show has steadily grown in popularity over the last 6 weeks, now generating 13 million viewers per episode, proving that the HBO model works really, really well when you have a show that can generate some discussion and some debate in between episodes like we've seen with The Night of the Seven Kingdoms. And I regularly see posts over on X where folks claim they're watching the show for a second, third, or fourth time. Now compare that to another fantasy show like The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, where they shed viewers and lose viewers with every single episode, or a show like Willow, where it was so bad, Disney basically disintegrated the show and removed it from their platform once the show was finished. Or even compare it with season 2 of House of the Dragon, where episode 4 of that season was incredible. And I watched that episode, I think, 4 or 5 times. I watched it over and over and over again. However, by the end of the season, all the air had started going out of the balloon, and the show started revealing some pretty alarming plot changes as well as character changes that will have a butterfly effect or ripple effect on future seasons. And those changes have been so alarming to George R.R. Martin, he has publicly stated it is no longer his story. So I'll go ahead and say it. While I'm looking forward to season 3 of House of the Dragon, I'll definitely be doing weekly breakdowns like I did with this show. Right now, at least in its current form, I am enjoying A Night of the Seven Kingdoms much more than House of the Dragon. Or at least I have higher hopes going into the future. And on that note, more beer, please. Yummy, yummy, yummy. But it is worth saying that as a lifelong fan of the fantasy genre, I can remember many chapters throughout my life where there were no fantasy shows to discuss. Like at least right now we have terrible shows and good shows where we can debate the pros and cons of all the above. But once upon a time, the fantasy genre basically didn't even exist on TV, so we live in a brave new world. And if you want to hear me speak more at length on this topic, I did a video a couple days ago. I'll link it down in the description below. But it's basically a video about all my favorite books that might potentially be turned into cool shows and cool movies in the future. And perhaps that's the greatest impact of all for me as a fan of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. It's allowed me to have hope for the future that it is possible in this day and age for people to still do cool adaptations of interesting fantasy books. So hell yeah, fuck yeah, it's a great time to be a fan of the fantasy genre. So as I look at my notes from the episode, I'm going to pour what remains from this bottle of beer. Un momento, por favor. Or almost, yeah. The only downside of this pewter mug is that it's not very deep. It can only hold half a bottle. But you know what? I was going to divide up my commentary on this episode between the good and the bad, but let's just go sequentially. There were a few minor variations on the original text, A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, aka the Hedge Knight. But, and I'm going to sound like a total hypocrite for saying this, there were 1 or 2 changes that I was at least open to, and I know for anybody who's been following this channel over the course of the season, you might be saying to yourself, wait a second, you are directly contradicting everything you've said about how writers for television totally suck ass, and writers of great books are on a, basically place them on a pedestal above the average writers for TV. And I still hold to that belief. However, there are 1 or 2 little interesting curveballs that the writers of the show threw our way, and so let's just tackle them all one at a time. Let's start with the first change, which I did not like. we have a scene where the Laughing Storm is he comes to visit Dunk as he's recovering, and there's a maester that's tending to his wounds. And the one change that I did like, at one point the Laughing Storm says to the maester when he's like, "Oh, his wounds are beyond my power to repair, blah blah blah," and the Laughing Storm says like an itchy butthole would be beyond your powers. I was like, you know what? That's kind of crude and kind of vulgar, but I must admit it did make me laugh. But what I did not like was that the Laughing Storm is trying to recruit Dunk for basically this war that's right over the horizon. And the way it was phrased and the way it was pitched, it almost seemed to imply that somehow he would have some inside knowledge that the equivalent of his great-grandson, Robert Baratheon, 90 years from now, would have a war where he would, at the Battle of the... what the hell is that battle called? It was the Battle of the Trident when he killed Rhaegar Targaryen. Hang on. Death of Rhaegar Targaryen. I've forgotten the name of that battle. Battle of the Trident. Holy shit. I'm a genius and I don't even know it. But the way he phrased it, he almost seemed to imply that he knows that at some point down the road, a Baratheon will sit on the Iron Throne. If he had made an implication or a reference to how, we've had one Blackfire Rebellion, more to come, because for fans of the books, there are 5 total Blackfire Rebellions. That would have made a lot more sense, but you can always feel the hand of HBO like kind of gently pushing the writers, try to find a way to link it to Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon and link them all together. It's all on Westeros. It's all the same timeline. You don't need to force that connective tissue. It all exists. It's all set in the same place with the exact same characters. So anyway, that kind of irritated me. However, the actor playing the Laughing Storm, and that actor's name is Daniel Ings. I think he was one of the better actors in the show. Even when they were giving him crummy scenes early in the season, he is an actor. Has a ton of talent, ton of charm, ton of likability. So I'd love to see Daniel Ings in a lot more shows and movies in the future. And then for a huge chunk of the episode, we watch as Dunk is trying to wrestle with his sense of survivor's guilt. Because everybody keeps reminding him, Baelor probably would have been the best king in many generations. One of the greatest Targaryen kings since the days of Aegon the Conqueror. And of course, here's this lowly Hedge Knight where he was about to lose his teeth and his hand and maybe his foot. But maybe it would have been worth it to lose a hand or a foot if the entire realm would have benefited from this incredible king. But no one will ever know. But if you believe in fate, or if you believe in the gods, or if you believe in any sort of higher power, then Dunk was preserved for some reason. But as every fan of George R.R. Martin's History of Westeros can tell you, Dunk is going to more than make up for that sacrifice in the years to come. But then we had an interesting scene where he bumped into Raymond, who got a few buns from the redhead the previous night, and then he just decided to up and get married. So more power to you, Raymond. You picked a cute one. And I'm not entirely sure the baby in her belly belongs to him, but he seems fired up to be the father all the same. And with Dunk, he shared a few good-natured laughs at his cousin Stefan's expense because it was the first trial by 7 in 100 years, and Raymond got to participate and he got to defeat his cousin all in one fell swoop. So Raymond, he's feeling pretty good, feeling pretty confident. But the first major scene is when Prince Maekar summons Dunk to see him and tells him that Aerion is going to be sent across the narrow sea to the free cities. But Dunk and Maekar have this interesting moment where they both talk about how the way people are going to whisper about them in the years to come, because everybody assumed that Baelor is going to be this incredible king. So no matter who is the next king after the current king dies, anytime crops fail, or there's a famine, or a long winter, or a war that goes poorly, or any sort of bad omen of any kind, people are going to say, well, none of this would have happened if Baelor would have been king. None of this would have happened if Baelor hadn't joined Dunk's side. None of this would have happened if Maekar hadn't killed his own fucking brother, swinging that goddamn Morningstar around like a crazy person in the battle. And so Dunk and Maekar have something in common. So Maekar offers Dunk what, from his point of view, is a very generous offer. A position at Summerhall with the Egg as a squire, which will allow Egg to basically have the joy and the privilege of being Dunk's squire, but also it'll allow Dunk to finish his training, because as great as Sir Arlen of Pennytree might have been at instilling values into Dunk, when it comes to all the knightly virtues of combat, sword and shield, battle axe, Morningstar, jousting, all that crap. I'm drunk off half a beer. Dunk's training is basically incomplete and he's got a long way to go. But for the time being, at least, and this is an interesting twist for the show, Dunk turns him down because in the context of the text, Dunk immediately goes into that speech of saying that, like, I'll take him on as my squire. However, we're going to do it my way. He's going to be a hedge knight. He's going to sleep in ditches. He'll, he'll go hungry at times, blah, blah, blah. They saved that scene for later because it's a TV show and you need a little anticipation and a little drama. And so initially, Dunk turns him down. And I was kind of getting frustrated by the change. However, the young actor who plays Egg, and I always forget his name, Dexter Soul Ansel, he really sells the scene because he's sitting just outside the room listening, and he looks so sad and so forlorn and just so beat up over the fact that Dunk doesn't want to take him as his squire. And they add a little line where he says to Dunk, well, perhaps you're not the knight that I thought you were. But I'm going to come out right and say it. Dexter Soul Ansel might be the best actor on this show. It's uncanny. And I'm horrified that as a child growing up in showbiz that they're going to ruin him and he'll get addicted to heroin and become a total fucking lunatic and that the rest of his life will be ruined as a result. Or you never know. He might be that one rare exception to the rule like Ron Howard. Ron Howard was a child actor, then became a teen actor, and then became a very successful filmmaker and director. So who knows? Maybe Dexter Soul Ansel is at the beginning of a very illustrious career, but I hope and pray that he's got some very normal people around him to kind of keep his head squarely on his shoulders. All right, so here's another minor change, which I wasn't too fond of, but it's not that big of a deal. But we think we're seeing a flashback to Arlen's death, and Dunk is asking him all these questions like, how come you never knighted me, blah, blah, blah. But as it turns out, Arlen was just having a long pause, and then he continues with the story. I don't think they should have ever confirmed that Dunk was not officially knighted. I like how they left it kind of vague and open-ended where it's implied in the text and it's implied in the show, and we kind of know more than likely it was never officially, done the proper way. But sometimes a little mystery goes a long way, and it allows people to discuss things and debate things and to have theories. And like there are a lot of writers like George R.R. Martin or even writers like H.P. Lovecraft where they know if you have like a map of the world and you leave a few spots open and unexplained, but then people will obsess over those bare spots on the map until the end of time as their imagination tries to fill in the gaps, even if you never provide them with that information. So leaving a few mysteries out there, I don't think it, you don't want to leave have that permanent black box storytelling where the watchers or the viewers or the audience or the readers are perpetually frustrated, but you need to tease them just enough to keep them excited while at the same time sustaining a little bit of mystery. But then we had a scene with Darren and Dunk where Darren, he's all banged up and Dunk confronts him over a drink. But Darren very wisely repeats the offer of Dunk taking Egg to Squire. And he reminds Dunk, once upon a time, Arian wasn't that bad a guy. He liked to go fishing. He was kind of a good guy. But sometimes being a prince of the realm and being surrounded by, castles and servants and people kissing your ass, it's not all that good for the development of your character. And the changes kept coming fast and furious because we got an interesting scene where Egg is looking at his reflection and you can see his platinum hair starting to grow back in. And I was very jealous because I haven't had any hair grow in on my head in quite some time apart from a little bit of peach fuzz that grows in on the side. But he's reminded of his bloodline and grabs a knife, heads over to Arian's bedroom where he's recovering. And who knows what he was planning on doing because if people can recall, Arian, once upon a time, held a knife between his brother's legs and said that he was going to castrate him so that he could be his sister and then he could marry him. This is, the Targaryens, a fucked up family. Luckily, Maekar is there and Egg ends up dropping the knife. Who knows what he might have done, but obviously they can't make any major changes to the story without fundamentally altering everything else that is to come. But I don't struggle to believe that Egg would have it in him to want to do that to Arian, because as we saw in some of Arian's battles earlier in the season, he was like, kill him, and he was not saying that on his brother's behalf. Yeah, there's no love lost between young Egg and his older brother Arian. But eventually Dunk does decide to accept Maekar's offer of allowing Egg to become a squire, but if and only if they can do it precisely the same way that he did it with Sir Arlen of Penetry. Basically, having a humble experience on the open road, eating when they can, sleeping in a bed where they can, but for the most part, a life of the wandering hedge knight. And so that was very true to the original text as written. What was a slight change was Maekar basically shoots him down. He's my only son that I've got left, blah, blah, blah. Which is not entirely true. He's still got plenty of sons that are alive, just not all of them are sons that you would be necessarily proud of. But Maekar does decide to not accept the conditions that Dunk puts on the table. So Dunk heads back out to his camp. He's getting ready to take off. He hammers a penny into the tree, like Arlen told him about back in the day. And Raymond comes to visit him. He brings him his old horse, and Dunk is very moved, but Dunk decides to give his old horse right back to him. But then the chill started to set in because we hear the little pipsqueak voice of, "My Lord Father says I am to serve you." I was like, oh my God, they're gonna nail this scene with it's like the Olympics, that pitch perfect landing by a gymnast or skier or whatever the case might be. And as they started repeating some of the dialogue from when Dunk first brought him on board about how, you'll ride that horse when I put you on that horse, but he kind of gives them all of his marching orders. It just gave me complete and total bliss and euphoria. And then there was one final twist at the very end, which actually is a departure from the text, but Makar is reacting in horror when he learns that Egg is run off without permission. In the book, Makar gives his blessing and sends Egg on his way, but in the context of the show, who knows, maybe in season 2 they'll have some Targaryens looking for Egg or whatever the case might be, but that was a subtle change to the text. And maybe I'm just a huge fantasy nerd. Maybe I'm too attached to this material, but I just fucking eat this shit up. And we see so many terrible shows these days when it comes to genre, whether it's science fiction or fantasy or horror or whatever the case might be. It's such a rare, precious thing for a show to come along with good writing and good good acting, and at least 60-70% allegiance to the text that it comes from. It's that rare unicorn where I'm just not constantly ripping my hair out in frustration, because most shows these days in the realm of genre, once again, all the genres that I like are so fucking god-awful. I would rather spend the night in jail getting my teeth kicked in than review them. Shows like Starfleet Academy, I mean, that show is just a complete and total vomit-inducing abomination, and so this very well might end up being the best show of 2026. I would love it if House of the Dragon Season 3 is equally good or almost on the same level. That would also be cause for celebration. But at a time where Marvel is pretty fucking lame, and Star Wars is pretty fucking lame, and Star Trek is extremely lame, and Lord of the Rings is lame, and what else? Basically, every ongoing franchise under the sun pretty much is lame right now, except for right now, the world of George R.R. Martin is pretty goddamn good. I won't say it's like the pitch perfect home run, exactly what every fanboy would dream of or what this fanboy would dream of, but it's pretty fucking consistently entertaining. And just seeing how the audience has grown for this and how people are getting on board and people are reading the text and getting excited again, I don't take it for granted for all, just how rare it is and just how cool it is when a good show comes along that more or less everybody can get on board, exchange a few high fives, talk about their favorite scenes, talk about their grievances, but it's like they're talking about their grievances in kind of a typical kind of dorky, nerdy way where it's the kind of granular detail that nerds obsess over, but it's not like this horrible fucking culture war and all this bullshit. This is a show that pretty much anybody can like. And anybody can enjoy, and hopefully HBO is taking notes and all right, let's just try to stay the course and make no mistakes. Maybe the one big criticism that people might have for this is that it doesn't tease any major battles to come or any major plot twist, or doesn't have any a big cliffhanger, because what's to come, the next novella, if anything, it's even kind of smaller and more contained and more modest in its approach than what we just saw. So it's not like they can show in the next season it's gonna be wizards and dragons and orgies and blah blah blah. None of that stuff's coming, and so I don't know if HBO will try to spicing things up or just stay the course and adapt things to the best of their ability, or maybe they'll just let House of the Dragon be the show that has all the big battles and all the big climactic moments and the big budget. But I imagine that A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms will get a slightly bigger budget, because right now A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is generating almost as many views as House of the Dragon at a fraction of the cost, and that tells you everything in the world. Great writing and great acting is so much better than great special effects. Right now, I'm watching Babylon 5 from the 90s, which I never watched back in the day apart from a few episodes. And that show is so cheap, and the special effects are so dreadful, but it has great writing and great characters, and for sci-fi nerds, it is just bliss and euphoria every step of the way. And when it comes to TV, I much prefer great writing and great acting over any other kind of, I think that it's been almost kind of a double-edged sword that TV has become so much like movies that people expect big-time special effects. Once upon a time in TV, people expected garbage special effects. And because the stories of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms more or less only feature one or two action scenes per novella, they can afford to keep that budget down and once again put all their emphasis on the writing and the acting, and that is the way that it should be. So who knows what the future might hold? Maybe Ira Parker, the showrunner of the show, will have a huge falling out with George R. R. Martin, or who knows, maybe they'll remain best buds. But Ryan Condal, if I were in his shoes between now and June, when season 3 of House of the Dragon comes out, I would try to find some way to have a reconciliation with George R. R. Martin, where George R. R. Martin can at least say, I don't agree with the changes, but he and I are now best buds, and we hope you'll enjoy the show, because there's going to be a bit of a divided fan base going into season 3, where
Alicent came to Dragonstone.
She will open the gates of the Red Keep and surrender to me.
Rhaenyra and Alicent, they've been so fundamentally altered where they're trying to turn them into the heroes of the story, whereas in the original story, they were much more like a character like Cersei Lannister. Not the same personality, but same, like, you know, power mad with ambition and all that, like, you know, evil and corrupt and diabolical and that sort of thing. They became increasingly kind of fucked up people over the course of the story. But I think Ryan Condal thinks, well, I need to have somebody to root for in that show. But once again, the butterfly effect and the ripple effect, if you make changes in those characters, and that changes their scenes, and if you change their scenes, that affects the story. And the further you get, or the deeper you get into a show, the more you feel those ripple effects. So I think by the end of House of the Dragon, Ryan Condal is going to be at a bit of a loss trying to figure out, how do I wrap it up where it feels even vaguely similar to Fire and Blood. But that is another conversation for later this summer, which I look forward to having. But in any case, hope everybody's had a good time talking about A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms for the last 6 weeks. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the notification bell. And I'll be back at you later this week, at the latest on Thursday, where I'm going to an early access screening of The Bride, which I'm looking forward to checking out. But thank you so much again for watching, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.